The letter arrived on a quieta afternoon, folded twice and worn at the edges as if it had traveled farther than most words ever should. Mary Collins held it in her hands longer than necessary, her fingers tracing the uneven crease, her heart already uneasy before she even opened at it. She didn't receive letters. Not anymore. Not since life had grown smaller, quieter, and painfully predictable. She slowly unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, but steady. Widower, 6 children. Ranch needs a woman who can help. Food, shelter, and a place to stay provided. That was all. No promises, no kindness, just need. Mary read it again, her chest tightening slightly at the simplicity of it. 6 children, a house full of noise, mess, and responsibility. Everything her life had once been expected to hold, and never did. She swallowed hard. Here he slingered on one word longer than the rest. Children. A quiet chest stirred deep inside her, familiar and unwelcome. She had spent years trying to accept it. The whispered pity, the subtle distance, the unspoken truth that followed her everywhere. She could not have children. And in the small town she came from, that had slowly turned her into something invisible, unnecessary. She folded the letter carefully, her hands steady even as her thoughts weren't. This wasn't about dreams. It wasn't about hope. It was about survival, and maybe something more she didn't dare to name. 2 days later, she was on a wagon heading toward a place she had never seen, carrying a single bag and a heart that had learned not to expect anything. The ranch appeared at sunset, wide lands stretching endlessly, the house standing firm but worn, surrounded by the kind of silence that came from too much responsibility and not enough help. Mary stepped down slowly, adjusting her shawl as the driver left without a word. She stood there for a moment, alone again, until the front door opened. A man stepped out. Thomas Hale. He was older than she expected, his face marked with quiet exhaustion rather than age alone. His eyes met hers, not cold, not warm, just careful. He nodded once. "You must be Mary." She returned the nod. "Yes." There was a pause, not awkward but measured, as if both of them were deciding how much to say and how much to leave unsaid. "You came a long way," he said. "I needed a place," she replied simply. Something in her honesty made him look at her a moment longer, but he didn't comment. He stepped aside. "You should come in." Mary walked toward the house, her steps steady despite the uncertainty pressing against her chest. As she entered, she fell immediately, not just the space, but the absence of something that should have been there. The house was clean, but it wasn't cared for. Not in the way a home usually is. It felt held together. Then she saw them, 6 children. They stood in different corners of the room, watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to resistance. The oldest, a boy nearly grown, stood near the wall, his arms crossed tightly. The youngest clung to a chair, half hidden but clearly observing everything. Mary didn't smile too brightly. She didn't speak too quickly. She simply inclined her head gently. "Hello." No one answered. Thomas cleared his throat. "This is Samuel, Ruth, Daniel, Clara, Eli, and little Rose," he said, gesturing briefly. Mary nodded to each name, committing them quietly to memory. She didn't try to step closer. She didn't try to fill the silence. She understood it too well. "Your room is down the hall," Thomas said. "It's small, but it's yours." "Thank you," she replied softly. The first night passed in stillness. Mary sat on edge of the narrow bed, listening to the sound of the house, the creak of wood, the faint murmur of voices, the quiet weight of a family that had lost something important. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. The absences spoke loud enough. Morning came early. Mary rose before sunrise, her body moving with quiet purpose. She stepped into the kitchen and paused for a moment, taking in the space. Unorganized, it didn't hesitate. She began. She cleaned. She sorted. She prepared something simple but filling: bread, eggs, warm milk. She moved without noise, without expectation. When the children entered, they stopped. The table was set. The smell of fresh food filled the room. Surprise flickered across their faces, quickly hidden but not gone. Thomas stepped in behind them, his gaze moving from the table to Mary. He didn't say anything at first. He simply sat down. The children followed slowly. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't empty. It was aware. Mary didn't watch them. She didn't wait for praise. She simply ate when they did and cleaned when they finished. Days turned into quiet rhythm. Mary didn't try to become their mother. She didn't step into a place that wasn't theirs. Instead, she built something new. She listened. She observed. She learned which child avoided speaking, which one needed gentle encouragement, which one watched everything but trusted nothing. She never raised her voice. She never forced closeness. And slowly the house began to change. Clara, who rarely spoke, began to linger near her while she worked. Rose started sitting closer at the table. It lasted none afternoon, small, uncertain, but it was the first time he had spoke to her directly. Mary answered without making it big. Thomas noticed everything. The way the children stayed longer at meals. The way arguments softened before they grew. The way the house felt steadier. He didn't mention it, but the silence carried something different now: acknowledgement. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Mary stood outside watching the children play. Their laughter was quiet, but real. She felt a shift inside her. She wasn't their mother. She never would be. But for the first time, she didn't feel empty. Thomas stepped beside her. "They haven't laughed like that in a long time," he said. Mary replied softly, "They just needed to safely breathe." He looked at her. "You're good with them." She shook her head. "I just listen," he said quietly. "That's more than most people do. But peace doesn't last forever." One afternoon, a woman from town arrived. Her ears were cold with judgment. "She can't even have children," she said bluntly. "What good is she to a house full of them?" Silence fell heavy. Mary lowered her gaze. But before anything else could happen, Clara speaked. "She helps us." Then Eli. "She makes things better." On by one, the children stepped closer, standing with her, not against her, with her. And in that moment, everything changed. And what happened next would change everything. The woman from town didn't speak again, not because she had nothing to say, but because the answer stood right in front of her. 6 children who should have been uncertain weren't. 6 children who should have been quiet had spoken. And the woman who should have been outsider wasn't anymore. She left without another word, but the silence she left behind was different. It wasn't heavy with judgment anymore. It was filled with something new: understanding. Word spread quickly in the kind of town where nothing stayed hidden for long. People began to talk. But this time, they weren't whispering about what she couldn't do. They were talking about what they were seeing. A house, one that felt barely held together, now moving with quiet strength. Children that once moved like shadows, now laughing, working, talking. A man who was once alone, no longer looking it. And at the center of it all, Mary. Not loud, not proud, just steady. Back on the ranch, the change continued to grow. Day by day, Mary didn't try to hold on to it. She didn't push it further. She simply continued what she started, being present, being calm, being there. Clara began sitting with her more often, not just watching but helping. Ela started asking questions, real ones now, not just careful words. Rose laughed more openly, sometimes running to Mary without thinking. And Samuel, the oldest, watched all of it carefully. He didn't speak much, but he wasn't standing at the distance anymore. One morning, as she worked outside near the railing fence, Mary walked past carrying a bucket. Samuel looked up. "You don't have to do that," he said. Mary paused. "I don't mind," she replied. He hesitated, then added, "You're not like others." Mary tilted her head slightly. "How?" He shrugged, but his voice was quietly honest. "You don't try to take over." Mary gave a faint smile. "I'm not here to take anything," she said. "I'm here to build something." Samuel didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. And that was enough. Time moved forward, and with each passing day, the house felt less like a place of loss and more like a place of growth. Thomas noticed it in the way he came home. The door wasn't longer just an entrance, it was a relief. The voices inside no longer tightened his chest, they settled it. One light night, as she walked into the kitchen, he found Mary there, fixing a small tear in one of the children's clothes. She didn't notice him at first. He stood there for a moment, watching the quiet focus in her movements. "You don't have to do everything," he said finally. She looked up, slightly surprised. "I'm not doing everything," she replied softly. "Just what I can." He stepped closer, resting his hand lightly on the table. "You've done more than that," he said. She said nothing. He didn't push, but the words remained between them, unspoken but understood. Then winter came, hard, colder than usual, the kind of winter that instead not just land, but people. Snow covered the ranch, thick, heavy, wind cut through the air like sharp glass. And with it came challenge. Supplies grew low, work grew harder, the children grew restless. But Mary didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. She organized. She planned. She made every bit of food last longer, thickened meals, kept the house warm with careful use of firewood. She turned what little they had into something enough. One night, the storm grew stronger than expected. Wind howled against the walls, snow piling high around the house. The smallest stones began to fear it. Rose clung to Mary, her voice trembling. "Is it going to break?" Mary held her gently. "No," she said calmly. "We're safe." Thomas worked outside to secure whether returning inside covered in snow. He got just inside the door before the wind slammed it shut behind him. He stopped for a moment, taking in the scene. The children weren't panicking. They weren't scattered. They were all together, close it to Mary, listening to her calm voice. She wasn't just keeping the house running, she was keeping it together. The long night passed slowly, but they endured. Morning came with quiet light reflecting off snow-covered fields. The storm had passed. The houses stood strong, and so had they. That day, everything became clear, not just to them, but to the town. People came by, checking, asking, curious about how the ranch had held up when others had struggled, and what they saw left them quiet. This house, once fragile, was now steady. This family, once broken, was now whole. And Mary, the woman once judged for what she could never be, had become the one holding it all together. Not as some other, not as replacement, but something else, something stronger, necessary. As days passed, the whispers in town changed completely. They weren't filled with pity anymore. They were filled with respect. One sunset, as golden light covered the ranch, Thomas stood beside Mary watching the children play, laughing freely now, without fear, without hesitation. He spoke quietly. "You changed this place." Mary shook her head gently. "No," she said, "it was always here." He looked at her. "No," he replied softly. "You made it whole again." She was quiet for a moment. Then for the first time, she didn't look away. And in that moment, there wasn't just understanding. There was belonging. Not forced, not given, earned. And as the sunset faded into evening, the 6 children ran around them, voices full of life, full of joy. And Mary stood among them, not as a woman who lacked, but as a woman who had become everything they needed. And that is what changed everything.